In the summer of 1838, an American missionary named William McClure Thompson rode on horseback through the hills of Galilee, recording what he saw in a leather-bound journal that would later become a 2-volume work called The Land and the Book. In one passage, he describes entering a small village near the Sea of Galilee and being offered a meal by an elderly shepherd. Thompson wrote that the man, who claimed to be in his 90s, ate the same 12 foods his grandfather had eaten, and his grandfather before him. The missionary noted, almost in passing, that he had not seen a single case of the wasting diseases common in European cities. He moved on. The journal entry was shelved. And for nearly 2 centuries, that observation has sat in plain sight, overlooked. What Thompson witnessed was not folklore. It was a dietary pattern preserved unchanged from the era of the Hebrew prophets. 12 foods, 12 meals, in rotation, built from what the scriptures themselves identify as the produce of the land God promised. And every one of those foods is sitting on grocery store shelves in America right now, stripped of its context, separated from the pattern that made it medicine. The question this investigation asks is simple. Why does modern medicine prescribe pharmaceuticals for conditions that the biblical diet appears to have prevented entirely? And why, when the evidence has been accumulating for a century, does no American physician put these 12 meals on a chart and hand them to a patient? The biblical anchor is Deuteronomy 8:8. The verse names what Moses called the 7 species of the promised land: wheat, barley, vine, fig, pomegranate, olive, and date honey. Around these 7, the prophets and patriarchs built a broader table: lentils, bitter herbs, cucumbers, leeks, and fish from the Sea of Galilee. 12 foods, 12 meals, a pattern. The first piece of evidence comes from Tel Megiddo, the archaeological site in northern Israel, where excavations over the past 40 years have unearthed storage jars carbonized in the destruction layers of the Iron Age. Inside those jars, researchers have identified charred remains of barley, lentils, and figs, arranged not separately, but combined, as if prepared as a single dish. The residue patterns on ceramic cooking vessels from the same period suggest slow simmering with olive oil. What Megiddo preserved is not a pantry, it is a recipe. The second piece of evidence comes from medical literature. Population studies conducted in the rural Galilee during the mid-20th century, before the full arrival of processed food, documented rates of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and colorectal cancer that were a fraction of those seen in industrialized nations. The Druze communities of the northern Galilee, who preserved traditional food patterns longer than their neighbors, showed the lowest rates. Researchers noted the correlation. They published. And the findings were quietly absorbed into academic literature without ever reaching the American dinner table. The third piece of evidence is linguistic. The Hebrew word for bread, lechem, shares its root with the word for war, milkama. The ancient rabbis discussed this openly in the Talmudic tradition, preserved in Tractate Berachot. Bread, they taught, was a battleground. The grain you chose, the way you ground it, the way you baked it, determined whether the bread healed the body or waged war against it. The distinction they drew was not between good food and bad food. It was between living food and dead food. Whole grain, stone ground, slow risen, was considered medicine. Refined, sifted, rapidly processed grain was considered an assault on the digestive system. The rabbis wrote this down nearly 2,000 years ago. Modern nutritional science has only recently caught up. The fourth piece of evidence concerns olive oil, not the oil on American shelves. The oil pressed in the traditional manner, from the first cold pressing of unripe green olives, which Dioscorides in the 1st century called omphaceum. This oil contains polyphenol concentrations that ordinary supermarket olive oil does not come close to matching. Archaeological work at Ekron, the ancient Philistine city, uncovered more than 100 olive oil presses dating to the 7th century BC, the largest industrial oil complex of the ancient world. The oil produced there was traded across the Mediterranean as both food and pharmaceutical. Wounds were dressed with it. Fevers were treated with it. Infants were anointed with it. It was not a condiment. It was the central pillar of the 12-meal pattern. This is the point in the investigation where the question must be asked. If this evidence has existed for decades, why has it been buried? The answer is traceable. In 1894, an American cereal manufacturer patented a process for stripping the bran and germ from wheat to extend shelf life. By 1911, a vegetable oil company had introduced a hydrogenated cooking fat designed to replace olive oil and animal fat in American kitchens. By the 1950s, federal dietary guidelines, heavily influenced by industry lobbying, had recommended replacing saturated fats with seed oils and whole grains with refined flour. The biblical pattern was not refuted. It was simply replaced. Replaced by products that could be mass-produced, shipped nationally, shelved for months, and sold at margins that living food could never match. The 12 meals did not fail. They were outcompeted by a supply chain that did not want them on the plate. Which brings the investigation to the practical pattern. 12 meals, built from the 7 species of Deuteronomy, 8, and the supporting foods the prophets ate. A breakfast of barley porridge with figs and a drizzle of olive oil. A midday meal of lentils simmered with cumin and a side of flatbread made from whole wheat. Grilled fish from cold waters with bitter greens. Cucumber and leek soup with a spoonful of date honey stirred in at the end. A pomegranate split and eaten at sunset, the way Jewish tradition has marked the Sabbath for 3,000 years. Roasted eggplant with tahini, a pattern found in every Levantine household since the rabbinic period. Chickpeas stewed with olive oil and garlic. Barley bread dipped in oil and salt, the simplest meal the patriarchs ate. Figs and walnuts as a mid-afternoon anchor. A cup of warm goat milk with a touch of honey before sleep. Grape leaves stuffed with rice and herbs, and the Sabbath meal. Slow-cooked lamb with lentils, barley, and the full table of bitter herbs. Every ingredient is available in American grocery stores this week. None require supplements. None require prescriptions. The pattern is the medicine, but the case is not yet closed. There is one final piece of evidence, and it is the piece that makes every other piece make sense. The Cairo Genizah, a storeroom of discarded manuscripts found in an Egyptian synagogue in 1896, contained medical prescriptions written by Jewish physicians in the 11th and 12th centuries. Among them, documents associated with the medical tradition of Maimonides describe the treatment of chronic illness not through isolated remedies, but through the restoration of what the physicians called Seder HaMazon, the order of eating. They prescribed the 12-meal pattern itself as treatment, not as prevention, as cure, for digestive disease, for weakness of the heart. For the disorders the ancient physicians called the slow fires of the body, the prescription was not an herb. The prescription was a week of meals. 900 years ago, Jewish physicians trained in both Greek medicine and biblical tradition were writing prescriptions for the exact 12 meals the carbonized jars at Megiddo contain, the exact 12 meals the oil presses at Ekron supplied, the exact 12 meals the shepherd in Galilee served William Thompson in 1838. The pattern has been preserved across 3,000 years, 4 continents, and 24 civilizations. And the American patient, in the year of the prescription pad, has been told none of it. The Bible did not hand down a list of foods. It handed down a table, a rhythm of eating that shaped the bodies of the prophets and the hands of the apostles, and the long lives of the shepherds who still remember. Deuteronomy 8:8 is not a travelogue. It is a prescription. To eat this way is not a diet. It is an act of remembrance, and a small stubborn refusal to forget what your spiritual ancestors already knew. Which of the 12 meals will you cook first this week? Write the name of that meal in the comments below. One word is enough. It tells the next viewer where to begin. Subscribe and stay with this investigation. The archive is still being assembled. The next case concerns a single herb, mentioned once in the book of Numbers, that a sealed Byzantine apothecary jar preserved intact for 1400 years. The evidence is already on the table.